skies, let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Thanks so much for leading us in the Black National Anthem, Talacia. Wonderful job, wonderful job. Let us pray. Dear kind and most gracious Heavenly Father, God, today we thank you as we come together to have these critical conversations and these presentations. God, we ask that our minds would be clarified, our hearts would be warmed, and that we would feel challenged and encouraged of what we can do going forward. We thank you for each participant, each platform guest, and we ask that everything done today would be in your power. And just let me pray. Amen. You may be seated. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We have people watching online and people who are present. We're having our third annual Racial Justice Summit, and we're excited for our discussion today. We have opening. We have a panel discussion. Our moderator is Mr. Robert Johnson. He's the elder here at our church, and he's doing some amazing things in the community. I just want to invite him up to come up, and he's going to introduce all of our panelists and prepare for our conversation.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have all of you here with us today. I'm going to ask our panelists if you would just go ahead and take your places on our dais, and we'll get started. Okay, thank you so very much. And you may be seated. Just make yourselves comfortable. Okay. So as our pastor said, this is our third year of doing this. Our program tonight is being broadcast on our YouTube channel. So it'll be there live for those who are watching tonight, and also will be there posted for those who want to go back and take a look and see and hear about the conversation that's taking place here. This is really important. I mean, just conversation is important. We can't get anywhere without at least first having a healthy conversation about it. So I don't know where the answers are going to surface and where this is going to take us, but I do know that wherever it takes us, we have to start with a great conversation, and that's what we're doing here today. So we're pleased to have our panel who have agreed to be with us and share their thoughts and ideas. So I'm just going to give you just about 15 seconds or so. If you would just give us your name and the organization that you represent, and then we'll just jump right into our discussion for today, okay? So, is there a mic there? Yeah. Can you use this mic? Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Good afternoon. My name is Trevor Fuller, and I am a former county commissioner at large here in Mecklenburg County and a former chairman of the county commission. I served for 4 terms, 8 years in total. I am a lawyer by practice and training, and I've returned to my law practice, having retired from the county commission just shortly. But I'm still involved in our community conversation because there's still much work to be done. And so I look forward to this conversation here this afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Hello, my name is M. Kenyatta Uring Sr. I am the first vice president of the Oslo County NAACP branch and a 24-year retired Marine veteran.
Good afternoon. I am happy to be here today. I am Thelma Byers Bailey. I am vice chair of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education representing District 2, and I've been on the board for over 8 years.
Good afternoon. I am Spencer Merriweather. I have the privilege of being the Mecklenburg County District Attorney. It is a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kendrick Cunningham, a candidate running for Charlotte City Council District 2, and also the president of the Young Democrats of Mecklenburg County.
I'm Miko McCarthy, and I'm an executive board member of Safe Coalition NC.
Great, thank you so very much. So our theme today, I'm not sure I'll call it a theme, but there was a title that was given to this experience, and someone went real old school on us, and there was an old commercial back in the 80s called, it was a Burger King commercial, "Where's the Beef?" Okay? And they wanted to use that as sort of the overarching theme for our discussion today. It's the "Where's the Beef" discussion that we're having. So I want to start by just asking a question, and you can just, any of you just jump in at any place, so no particular order. And we want to just begin to explore, so how would you describe the greatest challenge facing the Black community today? I know that's a big question, so there are a lot of places where you can begin. I'll just let you just process that for a minute and just share your thoughts with us.
So if I may, probably the greatest challenge we have in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County is a question of economic opportunity. And what I mean by that is, what we know is that if you, depending on where you live in Charlotte, will determine your health, will determine whether you graduate from high school, will determine whether you wind up on social services. And for our community, it shouldn't be that easy to tell what your life is likely to look like based on where you live. The truth of the matter is that Charlotte has been ranked 50 out of 50, dead last, in terms of if you are born poor in Charlotte, the likelihood is that you will die poor in Charlotte. That can't be. So that means that we've got to put resources all over our community, and that means we can't just talk about it, that we have to do it. So in my view, the greatest challenge facing us is economic opportunity that's available for everybody across the county.
Okay, great, thanks.
I agree wholeheartedly. Economics is a huge part of what plagues our community as a whole. However, I'm going to take it a little more macro. It really, in my opinion, is about education and knowledge. Because at the end of the day, from the lowest levels to the highest levels, you can't get the economics, you can't get the political power, you can't go out and use what you know, the information you know, if you don't have the proper information and you have no idea how to wield that information. The people on the streets need to understand what are the mechanisms available to them in order to better their life or in order to get to where they're trying to go. And the leaders at the highest level need to stay in tune with what is going on with the people from every level, top to bottom, so that they know how to best advocate for them from what position they are. And then somewhere in the middle, they need to understand how to get to those positions and how to get other people to those positions. So that said, education and knowledge is key.
And when it comes to education, for a long time, it was predicted that if your child couldn't read by the end of 3rd grade, they were going to end up in prison. And it was even said that the prisons were being built based on that number. So CMS, because I'm on the Board of Education for CMS, that's a predictor that we have to disrupt. And we have taken that seriously. With the help of Trevor Fuller over here, when he was on the county commission, one of the things that we had to address was how do we make sure children in third grade can read? And the problem was, well, they weren't ready to read when they got to kindergarten. So he made sure that every child that couldn't get to preschool got a preschool seat. Because if we could get them ready to read in preschool, then when they got to kindergarten and first grade, the teacher weren't trying to teach them their letters and their colors and all the things that they have to know in order to be able to learn to read. Because after third grade, they're reading to learn.
Third grade to solve the problem.
That's exactly right.
You talk about the one challenge, and so you can talk about the fact that the Black community is underhoused, undereducated, underemployed, underdiagnosed, which ends up being a really critical issue. But all of those things are within the context of great progress for the African American community. But the challenge is that all of that progress is unstable. That the way that African Americans are impacted by a single interruption to any one of those interactions with systems can set every family back just that much more. They feel that impact, we feel that impact so much more than every other community that exists. Until whatever progress that we make as families, as units, those roots are deeper into the ground. And that means that whatever we're able to accomplish through, again, housing, education, employment, and access to healthcare, if those roots aren't deepened, our families will always be more susceptible to the challenges that we face.
Sure.
I agree with everything that, and resonate with everything that's been said. I see, like the question was like Spencer said, you asked for one challenge, but I see all challenges that are a part that we experience as the African American community are all just as important as all of them. And I see our community right now in a specific time where, like, you have like a talented tent, but then you have everyone else who's trapped up in an exploitative system. And that system has interrupted the way that we interact with each other based upon income levels. So that's the biggest challenge I see facing our community and every community across this planet is how do we interact with each other just because we're human and not disrespect anyone based upon race, class, income, sexual orientation, and anything else that could differentiate you from another human being because we're all the same.
I want to piggyback off what Trevor said and what the young man said on the end. A lot of the issues with the Black communities, it's us as a whole, and then over-policing. Then you got to look at the leadership. So when you have neighborhood associations that underserve the community, goes back to knowledge and information, that keeps the community out. So when you're looking at resources for critical repairs for seniors or just other different things, if you have a person that's in a position even from your district representative, sometimes you get underserved from your district representative. So if your district rep is underserving you, your district commissioner is underserving you, then who can you really rely on? So these are the people that you're voting and saying you're going to be my voice, but they're underserving you. So that's a problem as a whole. It's too cliquish. That's one problem. When you're looking at us as a whole, we have a tendency of being over-judgmental. So we sometimes, and even with churches, sometimes a person can come into a church and say, hey, I want to go visit it, and they feel uncomfortable, so they don't go back. So we have to start breaking those barriers and stop being, I'm not going to say I don't judge, because I do judge. I'll be telling a story. I do have judgment issues, but I have it on the sense of certain things that I expect. So, but I'm not going to judge you for if your pants are sagging down. I might say, pull your pants up, but I'm going to come off on you in a different way. So the way you react to a person is going to determine how they react to you.
So there's a saying that goes, so it's impossible to be curious and judgmental at the same time. So here, Kenyatta describing people who need to be curious so that we can have cross conversation. So it reminds me of of the line from the, I guess it was the Lead on Opportunity grant group, who was saying one of the ways to address the issues is to have cross conversations across communities, not just within communities. So but as I'm hearing the descriptions here, I'm hearing kind of a systemic set of issues. It's not just an issue, it's a group of issues. One of the things that has been kind of bugging me is our ability or inability to think about these things systemically. So for instance, you know, we talk about housing, and that's a big deal here in Charlotte. I mean, everywhere you go now, there's a housing project going up. But then you tell me, hey, my economic mobility and my quality of education is tied to where I live. So are we realizing that when we put a spot someplace and we say, hey, move into the spot, we're also pushing over a set of dominoes that say, this is going to influence your economic mobility. It's also going to influence your education. You know, so we're looking to you know, solve the presenting problem without asking, what's the bigger picture that we're creating? How are we contributing to the future without knowing it? You know, what are these unintended consequences? So, how do you respond to that systemic piece? Go ahead.
So I'm going to present something here that either has not been unpacked this way, and it may even be a little extreme to some people. Let me start by saying the Marine Corps sends each of its, you know, at every level, we go to a school to learn how to fight war on a different level. The last school I attended as a major, it's called Command and Staff College. We learned global strategy for fighting war around the globe. There are 4 pillars they teach us that in which America fights warfare. And it's a concept called DIME, D-I-M-E, just like the coin. The D is for diplomacy, the I is for information, the M is for military, the E is for economics. That is how America fights wars. Now, if you think about that in that context, diplomacy, that's the use of laws to fight. How many laws have been created to keep our community supplanted? Information. How many times have our people been misinformed intentionally? You think of something as well known as like the Tuskegee experiment. M, the military part. That's the part most people think of when they think of warfare. But we have this thing where we think it's 2 armies against each other. But when you see young men and women in the streets being shot down police and then retaliating against the police, make no mistake, they're at warfare. And it is a form of what we call irregular warfare, guerrilla warfare. And then E, economics. Just as he said, and just as it's been explained, everything from housing to access to banking to lower wages, not being paid the same, we have experienced on a regular basis since we've gotten, I won't say since we've gotten here, I will say since slavery started here, because we were here well before slavery, but since they decided to supplant our people and make us, or at least try to tell us that we are less than everybody else, those 4 pillars have been used against us consistently. And the thing we need to understand, if you wrap all this together, is we really are at war. We just don't realize it. And until and war doesn't mean you go out and set everything on fire. It means you fight back in all 4 places. And that's what we have to do.
Okay.
So can I pick up on that, because that's a very interesting way of thinking about things. And the reason I talked about economics is that I think that the issue of race is at bottom an economic issue, because the idea of racism is to keep resources from a certain group of people, not just now, but into the future. So it's a structure that you set up to limit access to resources to a particular group of people. So you call them less than, you call them different, you call them whatever, so that you can justify keeping resources from this group of people, so that you can have the resources for yourself. So if you build a system that is intended to perpetuate that, everything we talk about is just anecdotal, is just little piece. And until you get to the structure of it, you can't have an effect. Now, having said that, and you might get to this, I think one of the ways that we can combat that is through the church. Through the church, we can address health issues. Through the church, we can address economic issues. Through the church, we can address educational issues. But we used to see the church as the foundation of it. We don't anymore. But maybe that's what we should be getting back going again. Now, I'm not in office right now, so I can say a lot of things that I couldn't say when I was in office. But that's what we need to do. We need to, we talk about these things a lot. Charlotte's great about that. We talk about a lot of stuff. But until we're willing to do the hard stuff, to demand when politicians come into your church, you demand results. Don't come in here telling me about how you're so great, how I should vote for you, but I don't get any results from it. We got to start demanding. So if you want to come and you want to campaign in our church and talk to our people, we ought to be getting something from it. We ought to demand accountability from our elected officials. And I will tell you, having been one, that we are not held accountable enough. I can tell you that right now. People don't even pay attention to what you're doing. So anyway, I could go on. But I think the church may be the place where we start to hold people accountable to get results.
Okay.
So why don't, I mean, we're all in this boat together, so why don't we hold people accountable? I mean, I hold my children accountable, okay? And my spouse holds me accountable, I hold her accountable. We've got a lot more at stake when we talk about our elected officials and the society that we are creating or we see emerging. Why don't we do that? Yeah, go ahead.
I skipped you.
Oh, yes.
My only thing would be, my only issue would be when you're looking at accountability, what do you identify as accountability? Because you can go to an elected official, ask for something, and you can get that. Prime example, back when we were protesting, a lot of different situations occurred. A lot of people felt like it wasn't no transparency, so they felt like they didn't want the actual police department to investigate cases. So it was a big old thing. Everybody made a big fuss, big old fuss. So then you have it, this is taken away. Census say, okay, we'll have an outside agency to investigate, start sending stuff to the SBI. So once everything started going to the SBI, then you have the issue, everybody like, oh my God, there's no transparency. You can't go to the SBI, the FBI asks for nothing. But you got what you asked for, now you're mad. So depending on what you identify as accountability, because a lot of people don't, they ask for stuff, and when they get it, they still mad. So it's like a circle reaction. It's like, well, I gave you this, but that ain't good enough. Then you're gonna find something else. So it's like you go back and forth. So again, it depends on what you want to identify as accountability.
Okay. Another word.
Yes, sir. I was just going to say that that accountability piece is extremely important. How I would have answered the question before you two gentlemen spoke was there's a huge question about where power lies. On each of those areas where Black community faces specific challenges, the power to change those structures does not exist in such a way that our community can reach out and touch those levers. If you want to change housing policy, I don't care how many people you elect in Mecklenburg County, you cannot change that in Mecklenburg County. You have to depend on whatever goodwill you can find among a whole lot of folks in Raleigh who don't share any interest with the African American community in Charlotte whatsoever. That means that impairs our ability to change those policies. Much of that is true in education. Anything that happens with our school board, at a moment's wit, people who have nothing to do with the interests of the African American community in this location can change it on a whim. That is true in every single vector, economic, political, social. That power lies elsewhere. And so in order to change that, you've got to change where the power lies, and that's not an overnight decision. That's something that actually takes time. To the point that I believe Trevor's going to make, it takes making sure that the communities, such as the faith community, advances those values when and wherever you can. So that's how you shift where the power lies.
So I'm also hearing you suggest that as part of the education piece, that we need to be educated as to how the power structure is organized, how it's put together. We can't just go in and just demand stuff without knowing where the power structure, how it's actually set up to deliver or keep things from happening. Okay, good.
I'd just like to give you an example of how the community has changed the power in Charlotte Mecklenburg schools with a specific issue that they came to the school board and said, we don't believe that you are treating our children equitably. And equity has changed. It used to be, if you've got 5 pencils, then I should have 5 pencils. If you've got that book, then I should have the same book. But equity nowadays isn't about the things that you've got so much as the opportunities that you have. And so they've redescribed what equity looks like. If you've got a fence this tall, if I'm a tall person, all I have to do is stand up and my head is over the fence and I can see over the fence. But if you're a little bit shorter, you can't see over that fence. But if I give you a box to stand over on, and you step up on that box, now you can see over the fence. Okay, so, but I've got a little person here. Even on that one box, he can't see over the fence. So I give him 2 boxes. Now he's got his head up over the fence, and now he can see over the fence. That was called equity. And then the 4th pillar of equity was, just take the fence down. Now everybody can see, even the little person. But the community came to CMS and said, we want a seat at the table on what equity looks like for our children. And that's a policy issue. We have a policy committee. And the policy committee debated for 6 months on whether or not they should have an equity committee. And I was on the policy committee at that time, and I said, okay, you all think it's going to take us 6 months to figure this out. Okay, I'll give you 6 months. And after 6 months, they talked about it, and they said, well, yeah, we do need one, and this is what it would look like, but we're still not ready. And I'm going, but I gave you 6 months. So they said, well, we want some more time, and I'm going, no, you had enough time. I'm voting for you. The equity committee starts today, starts now. And we had enough votes. The equity committee was formed. That thing took off. It has been a phenomenal success. They took our policy, because policy is what the school board does. We are a governance body. We operate through the policies that we have either formulated or we create. They went through our entire policy. They broke themselves. We had to nominate people to be on the policy committee. Teachers, parents, church members, sorority members, everybody got a chance to submit their name that they wanted to be on the policy committee. We selected all the policy people. They have done a phenomenal job. They went through our entire policy, broke it down. These policies work. They should be this way. These policies are not in our favor. They need to be changed, and here's how we want them to be changed. I'm saying the people, the parents, the citizens got a seat at the table and made a difference.
Say that too. Yeah, I definitely agree. This is something I really wanted the people to hear. I think a lot of times that when we talk about how we hold our elected officials accountable, we never take into account that elected officials are just like you two as well. And one of the biggest things that I'm always reminded of in our country is that we live in a huge giant experiment. Democracy is nothing but an experiment. And a lot of times we elect people who are extremely horrible political scientists and do not know how to operate democracy. And the biggest piece is that we have to become politically educated. It's like that's something you have to do on your own. Like if you want power, you have to go seek that information. You have to go seek that knowledge yourself. It's not nothing that, we have voter education programs, but that's just not enough for you to have to go fight and get that information that you want so that you can be as politically educated as possible. And with that political education, you're able to know when an elected official is crossing you wrong or underserving you. So that's it.
You had a thought?
So I want to present something that, once again, I think ties a couple of the things that were here. You hit on the point about the education. We're coming back to the education. You talked about people independently going out and doing what they need to do in order to make that change. And I want to tie those two things together. I'm going to slightly disagree with you, brother, that we have to figure out how to get to the table. I don't fully disagree with you. We do have to figure out how to get to the table. But one of the things we as a people have to stop doing, in my opinion, is thinking we have to be at their table and that's the only way to get it done. We need to start learning how, but this goes back to education, learning how to build our own tables. For example, something that we have done down in Oslo County, I spend most of my days when I'm out of the house visiting with elected officials, the sheriff, the police chief, and we'll go in and have some very uncomfortable conversations with them. And when they disagree with what we believe as the NAACP that our community needs, I have no problem telling them, I'm not here asking you, I'm telling you what we need and what we're going to have. And once again, going back to understanding the way America is set up, the government is limited in what it can do. It's intentionally built to be a bureaucracy. It's not supposed to operate quickly because that would allow some folks who don't have good intentions for everyone to be too powerful and change things too quickly. So our government was intended to be that way. There are certain gaps that are there in their power. That's where non-government agencies and nonprofits come in. They fill those gaps. So one of the things that I did over the last 3 years was go out and educate myself by joining different nonprofits, partnering with different nonprofits, understanding what other powers and things we have available in our community, and then bringing those together into a coalition. And when we have things like housing being taken from people or schools not being taken care of, I may call a board of education member or a county commissioner, but the next thing I do is pick up the phone and call the directors of our different nonprofits, the pastors of our church, and go, this is our school. I'm not waiting for the Board of Education to make sure our kids go down and have a clean school to go to and our teachers have a clean school to go to. We get up, we go down there, as many people as we can. And eventually what happens, a couple of things happens. One, you teach people how to build their own tables. This is not the only way to get it done is to wait for the Board of Education to do that. The other thing we do is we actively go out. I think it was you, brother, that said something about the talented 10th. We actively are going out, finding our leaders by going and being part of all these different organizations, and this gets to what you talked about us being divided. We can't be divided because you go out and you go to these different organizations, learn who your leaders are, learn who your movers and shakers are, and then once we find them, we pull them into one place. You can do it wherever you want. You can build a coalition like I did, or the other thing we did was the NAACP then started recruiting all of these leaders from around the community, and we take our veteran service organizations and we put them together and we tell them, this is your area of expertise. Go out and figure out what we need to be doing and bring it back, and then we figure out how to build that table. If you are in the education committee, go out and figure out what we need there, and we start building it here. We're not waiting for anybody to do anything. We're going to build our own table. And then, to your point, we go out and we take those people, once we have those committees set, and we're all talking the same language, and all those people go sit on city committees, they go sit on county committees, and you bring that information back. And then we figure out, once we know what they're doing, and we've already got our plan, we kind of put those things together, give it the Vulcan mind meld, and figure out how do we make all this work for us. But we need to stop waiting for people to do something for us and stop asking people to do things for us. If they're not willing, we have to be willing to put the work in to do for ourselves and build our own tables.
Can I
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just, well,
Can I go ahead and ask the question, because I think you all are going to jump in there.
Oh, no, I was just gonna tell them you have to be a good leader in order to get people to follow.
Yes, ma'am.
So some ideas, some suggestions of things that could be done to address these issues. So you've given us a great list. So there are these centers of excellence in places like where you are, where we can all learn from. And you were talking about not just going out the doing, but also the leadership component of that. So you want to tell more about that?
So if you're not a good leader, who's gonna follow? If you don't have a good message, who's gonna listen? So when you're looking at the different models, when you're saying come together collectively, you can come together collectively, but if you got somebody that's more or less ego-driven and they want to be more about the camera and not about the work, you can't get nothing accomplished. And that's the problem that we have here. It's too much, I want to be like Puff Daddy, I want to dance in the video. And you ain't getting nothing accomplished. So that's our problem here. So you got a lot of great organizations that do things, but half of them want to be the only one that shines separately. And then a lot of times they got a lot of good PR conversation, but no work ethics. So that's a problem. In order to get people to follow you, you have to be a great leader and make sure you got a good message, and maybe they'll listen.
Things, I'm sorry?
Mr. Fuller had a follow-up.
Yeah, so I agree with you 100%. And that is a problem Charlotte has, because everybody wants to be a leader. Everybody wants to say, I'm president of this, I'm the leader of that, I want to be on the news. And you asked the question at the beginning, why don't we do this? What's holding us back? It's because we all have lives. We're trying to raise families. We live lives that are on our phones all the time. We are distracted all the time. There's so many things competing for our attention. And to do what you just described, which I agree with you, takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of research, and there aren't enough people who are willing to devote that kind of time. That's not to say there aren't such people. I think there are. But to my district attorney's comment, it is about who has the power to make these changes. You and I can get together all day, but at the end of the day, who can say we're going to spend money on this and not that? Who can say that we're going to have X number of police officers and not Y number of police officers? Somebody has to make those decisions. And that's why I'm suggesting that involvement in our governmental structure is at least a key part of it. But the reason I'm focusing on it is because we don't pay enough attention. We think we're paying attention to it, but we're not. We're not in there at county commission meetings, at city council meetings, hearing what the conversation is, hearing where development is going. I was just talking to someone earlier today about all the gentrification that's going on and the development that's going on. It's great, but guess what we're doing? We're moving people, our people, from our own neighborhoods. Where are they going to go? So somebody's making the decision that this development can go here and going to move these people away. Somebody's making that decision. So we need to get to who's making that decision and hold those people accountable, because there are answers. There are people who have power to make these decisions. And so our job has to be somehow to find those folks who have the space, who have the ability, who have the desire to do that research, to come to county commission meetings, city council meetings, go talk to the district attorney, the school board member, and start demanding results, like that group did with the equity committee that you discussed. That's a rare thing. It doesn't happen that often, and what I'm suggesting is that it ought to happen more. I ought to be getting, if I'm a county commissioner, I ought to be getting thousands of emails every day from citizens saying this is what we need to do as opposed to that. But I don't. When key issues come up at the county commission, I hear nothing from the community. Nothing. So, what am I supposed to, if I'm an elected official, what am I supposed to determine from that? That nobody's really paying attention and nobody cares. So we've got, that's what I'm saying over and over again, we gotta hold the people who are in power, who have this power. We got to hold them to account every single day.
Now, those folks are, I mean, like you said, they have. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say, we don't hear from our community.
That's fair.
We
That's
hear
fair.
from the
That is
other
fair.
community
Yes,
a
that is
lot.
fair. That's fair.
They will contact us specifically. You all are getting ready to build a school on this street, and you're gonna make my child go to that school. Oh, yeah, we get all of that.
Now that's good.
Loud and clear. They will, if you probably didn't notice, that the school board had a meeting Thursday night, Thursday from 5 to 6 or 7. We were talking about what we're going to spend the money on in our next year's budget. Are we going to buy that, or are we going to spend it on this? Now, you didn't have any input on it when we were talking about it on Thursday, but you will have a chance to have your say on what we spend money on before that budget comes final. Because once we nail it down and finalize it, we have to send it over to the county commission, because we say what we want, they tell us how much money they're going to give us to do it. And then they tell us, well, we don't want to spend the money on this, we want you to spend the money on that, and then we have to have a dialogue. That's a horse of another color.
Let me transition. We've got about 10 minutes left, and you know, I'm kind of hearing an undercurrent of communities, black communities, asking, will anybody hear me? And does my voice really make a difference? I've seen all those other people, all their voices make a difference, but does my voice make a difference? So historically, in the black community, the church has been a significant catalyst for moving thought, for shaping thoughts and ideas and getting people involved. You know, I'm not seeing a lot of that now, but let me ask you, what role do you see the church and the religious community playing now in trying to move and galvanize people of color to speak up and be heard?
Doing some of these summits, a lot of these summits is pretty good. That's a better way to get actively involved. But one big message I would say for the church to get more people actively involved is stop being profiling. Because sometimes a lot of churches have an issue with the way a person dressed. A person might not have church clothes, and people are so used to feeling like they got to go to church with suits on. So you get some of the younger kids that come in, we already know how they're going to dress. It's God say come as you are. So let that be just that, not us be the judge nor the jury. But a lot of times people come into church and they can tell and they can feel if a person is talking about the way they look, maybe their hair is, because the kids' hair is looking like they put the finger in the wall, but you got to accept it. But if we stop looking at that and give them a good message to make them feel comfortable to come back, they'll come back and listen to what you got to say. They'll say, I like that pastor. And they'll go get some of their more friends, and they'll constantly come in, because then now they'll feel welcome. If you don't like what they got on, just say, hey, you know, I got some clothes, or, you know, do you need anything? And if they need it, they'll tell you, I appreciate that, I didn't know how to ask. But instead, you make them feel uncomfortable, and they feel disconnected, when they really could be out there while we in here talking, robbing the cars. But instead, they're trying to get a message. So I think that's where the breakdown comes from some churches, not all churches. But if we make a person feel comfortable, they'll come in. Education sessions, talking about a lot of racial issues, like they say, you know, housing, homeless, a lot of different things. Bringing awareness is a starting point, a big point.
Definitely agree and resonate. I think that for me as a Gen Zer, the role that I see the church playing in the future of our society is more of like a healing role. But I feel the church has to innovate what it is that, you know, it considers healing. Like, you know, these are just four walls, and you know, you see things like people aren't just, or at least people in my generation, they're not, this doesn't look attractive to them. So having a church outside of four walls is something that, we thrive. Like, we thrive on, like, having outside venues or, like, doing things outside. Like, you hear a lot of, like, the catchphrases, we're outside again. So I think, like, taking the church outside of the four walls and being that space of healing of the trauma that we're experiencing from capitalism, the trauma that we're experiencing from poverty, the trauma that we're experiencing from gentrification and displacement, so that we can find peace in the conflict we're going on. I think that would help give people a space of, like, restoration and tranquility to where, like, we can go back Monday through Friday and do this again.
Interrupt you really quick. My dad went to college. I believe his second year in college was the opening, basically the beginning of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. The first mass meeting for the bus boycott was held at Holt Street Baptist Church. It was held, I believe, around like 8:30 or 9. It was done that way, scheduled for a time that people could receive hope and light, because all of the domestics, all the folks who worked and had domestic jobs, couldn't get off and go home and get dressed and then come to the church until a particular hour. The church adjusted to the needs of the people who were there so that they could hear them, so that they could be heard and receive the very hope and inspiration that they came looking for in the first place. If our faith communities are ever going to be able to get back to a place where on a mass level we are inspiring and we are organizing and we are building these structures within a community to be able to move these systems and move these structures, church has to take a look at how it's meeting the needs of the people that it serves.
So all of these things are tied together. And I'm going to take it all the way back to the comments she made about leadership, the comments these two brothers made about the church, the comments you were making about people being in touch with their leaders or having leaders that are doing what they're supposed to do. At the end of the day, and the church should be central to this, servant leadership is really the only kind of leadership that's most effective for the people. And you can't serve people, just like you said, if you're inside of four walls, you're not serving anybody but the people that walk in here. And the church didn't used to just be that. You have to meet people where they are. It's not about waiting for the people that are elected to do what they're supposed to do. And you go out and you find those people. How much time, are we spending out in the neighborhoods? I'm talking about the bad neighborhoods. I'm talking around the little kids that you drive past and judge their parents because they're dressing them the way they are or because their pants are sagging. How many times have you stopped your car, pulled over, and got out? We're talking about what elected leaders won't do and not having people to do that. I see 6 people sitting up here on the stage that call themselves leaders. The word people aren't doing shouldn't come out of our mouth because every one of us is capable of doing. If this is all we're doing is sitting on the stage and talking, then we're doing a disservice to our people. Get up, go out into the community, and actually spend some time with the poor, the undereducated, the folks that are struggling. And I'm not talking about giving out turkeys. I'm talking about go sit in their house with them. Go sit on the porch with them. It is not uncommon for me to go out to a neighborhood in my community at 9 o'clock at night in what people think is the worst neighborhood and sit on the stair and have a beer and a cigarette with somebody because I want to understand their problems. And I'm no better than them. Just like, I think it was you that said, it was you, that our elected leaders are the same as us. They're people. They are no more capable than we are. The only thing that they may have that we don't have is a position and an education, and the education about how that process works. But that means those of us who are calling ourselves leaders have to get off our butt. That includes our pastors. Get off our butts. Get out of our pulpit. Get out of our offices. Get out of our fancy homes, our comfortable living, and go out to where our people, the ones that are suffering, are, and find out what's going on. Don't wait for your number 2, your deacon, your whoever, to come back and tell you. No, go out and see it with your own eyes, and then figure out the problem. We like to admire problems, which means sit around and talk about them and say how great they are, but we don't spend a lot of time as a community talking about, here's how we're going to solve it.
So you asked the question about what role should the church play. And it seems to me that the church can play a convener role, not just service on Sunday, but during the week. You have a building that's here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Why can't this building be, not necessarily just this building, but you know what I mean, the church building, be used as a convening place? Let me tell you, when an elected official gets a call from a pastor for you to come visit the church, they're coming. You know why they're coming? Because those are votes. And the thing that's at the top of mind of every elected official is being voted for. So, if you want to get folks in the room and get them paying attention, a pastor of a church has tremendous power to convene not only people, but folks who are in power. So, I'm suggesting that the church ought to use that power. Now, I know a lot of people are uncomfortable with it because it might seem partisan. You invite Democrats, but you don't fight Republicans. People might get kind of funny about that. People might get concerned about 501c3 status. There are ways around all of those things. But I'm suggesting that if you don't hold yourself out, call people in, that it's not going to happen. And I'm suggesting to you also that elected officials are ready to come. They want to come. But they're not going to come usually if you don't ask. They're not going to come to you and say, hey, can you hold this meeting? Sometimes they will, but most of the time not. But if you call, you're going to get every one of them there. And so I'm saying use that power. And so once you got people in the room and folks are listening, folks are demanding, folks heard what this county commissioner said. And next week, when they have their county commission meeting, and he does something totally different than what he said in church last week, when you invite him back, you're going to say, you know, you were here last month, and you told us X, Y, Z, but we saw you on TV, and you said ABC. What's the deal? You're going to get the attention of elected officials. So I'm saying use what you have already to convene people, because that's how you get to the power. That's how you make things happen. I was in, if I can just say this one last story, I was in a barber shop in Wilmington, and this young kid was in there. It was on a Saturday. Everybody's getting a haircut, they're talking, and he said, you know, I don't care about politics. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a bunch of people on TV. What I have to say doesn't matter. And so I said to him, I understand what you think. But you see that street out there? Somebody made the decision for that street to be there. Somebody decided to allocate money for the asphalt. Somebody cut it out. Somebody decided that it was going to go there and not over here. Somebody decided that. Now, either you can be involved in the decision that was made, or you can let decisions be made for you, because they will be made for you. And so far, the decisions that have been made for us as an African American community, not so great. Well, guess what? Help make some other decisions. That means we got to speak up. That means we got to participate. Even if you might think in that one instance that, you know, you don't have, believe me, every elected official listens to votes. Every elected official. When you send an email, when you come to their office, when you call them, they're going to pay attention. Why? Because they want to get elected. So, speak up. Make them respond to your concerns. If that's the only message I have today, I'm not preaching, not a preacher, but I'm just saying, get involved.
And there is an election every single year.
Yes,
every year.
Yes, there is.
So our time has expired. I am grateful for you being willing to take the time to come in and talk with us. I'm reminded of several axioms, one that says, well, I'll start with the St. Francis of Assisi one that begins with, so help me to accept the things I can't change, help me to change the things I can, and help give me the wisdom to know the difference. So we can't change everything, but there are things we can change. We need wisdom to know what that is. The education piece, knowing where the power lies, what that looks like, how we can tap into that structure. The other piece is this old idea of, we're always on the road to somewhere, even when we think we're standing still. So even when we don't vote, we're still placing ourselves on the road to somewhere. It's you can't win, you can't break even, you can't get out of the game line from the whiz. So here we are. We have the opportunity, as I'm hearing you say, to shape the future that we want. And we got to realize that we can express our voices in the right way, and those voices can be heard. So I want to, again, thank you for giving your time, investing your time in all of us here today. And we look forward to taking all of you up and your commitments to be here. Where's my pastor? You hear that, pastor? All right, got it. All right, so let's give our panel a hand and
Thank you.
Thank you again. Okay. All right, Pastor, you want to do your piece? Okay. All right, so we can take our seats, adjourn. Thank you.
One thing too, let people know when they do it, they gotta know the divisions too, separating the county from
The city, yes.
That's what
Thanks, man. Appreciate you being here. Good to meet you, man. See you again. I hope so.
Going to do a presentation, followed by, after I go, will be Mr. Tim Emery, who's running for district attorney from Mecklenburg County. I have my presentation in front of me, but it's supposed to be something on the background. Tell me when it's good to go. Okay. So our presentation today is going to look at the evaluation of North Carolina state report card system. So we're not talking about the report cards that get sent home to you, but how many of you know that if a report card is done, let's say you move to a new area, you're trying to figure out where am I going to send my kids? How many of us have had that experience? You ask, where are you going to send your kids when you move to a new area? Okay. Now, in 2014, I believe I think 2014, North Carolina started a school reporting system in which they would look at each school would be given a grade. So MLK Middle, Hidden Valley Elementary, all have a letter grade. Did y'all know that? Okay. So what we want to think about is how are these schools evaluated? How are these schools graded? Does anyone have any idea how these schools are evaluated or graded? Someone say data. You said performance data? Performance data, yes, performance data. Next slide, please. So these schools are evaluated based upon performance data. Now, let me ask you a question. You ready for the question? If I were to say, oh, he's a good basketball player, and then everyone believed that I said, hey, he's a good basketball player, does that make that person a good basketball player? What actually makes them a good basketball player is what they're able to do, right? Now, what if I were to tell you that the testing model that determines whether a school is an A, B, C, D, or F school isn't really a fair and equitable approach to evaluating a school. Yeah. Because when I evaluate a school, there are certain things I look for, right? As a parent of black boys, I want to make sure that their discipline policies are fair and just. That's a letter grade for me, right? I want to make sure that the teachers care about my student. Okay, so we have to think about those things when we think about education. But as our people in the back so eloquently said, schools are graded based upon performance data. And that performance data is school performance data. That is based upon a standardized test, and then there's this thing called an EVOS. EVOS looks at whether a computer system said they're supposed to be this far by now or not. And the truth is, do you know no one really knows how EVOS is really evaluated? It's an algorithm that determines where the kids should be. Okay? Okay? I'm used to calling response, excuse me. So next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about just the presentation. This presentation is going to evaluate the school grading system in North Carolina. And we're going to use social reproduction theory. Someone says, what is that? Someone says Karl Marx. Oh gosh, he's a Marxist. I'm not a Marxist, okay? But Karl Marx published a theory in Das Kapital, which is actually a German publication, and I don't read German. But the theory is that social inequality is reproduced from generation to generation. So these things like a cycle of poverty. You've heard this before? Right, yeah. So the concept is that schools that we're sending our kids to, they maintain a cycle that keeps going over and over and over and over again, okay? So what you're saying, I'm sending my kid to this school because I expect the school to do this and the third. What if the school you're sending your kid to really is only going to do this, that, but never the third? Okay. And Pierre Bourdieu built upon this Karl Marx's social reproduction theory and further developed this concept. And he talked about there are 4 forms of capital. Thank you so much. There are 4 forms of capital. There is financial capital, which is, I think, the form of capital we're all familiar with, money. There's social capital, cultural capital, and human capital. Human capital is the ability to produce labor, so your physical human abilities. Cultural capital is, in a society in which we live, we know that there's one culture, there are cultures that have more value than others based upon how society views them. So if you are a part of a certain culture more naturally, a more dominant culture more naturally, you're going to enter into the classroom with a certain set of, as a student, you're going to enter the classroom with a certain set of benefits because you already know the lingo that you're going to encounter because it's spoken in your cultural language, for lack of a better term. And then we have this term called social capital. Social capital is your social power, your social influence, okay? So we're going to start with a brief historical overview of CMS and Charlotte Mecklenburg schools. But 1954, Brown versus Board of Education happened. I'm sure many of us have heard this, we know this. Brown versus Board of Education found that it was not good practice. It was bad to have schools segregated based upon race because funding for those schools was determined based upon race. So they said it's better to have integrated schools than to have segregated schools. Now, it took a while, you know, after the decision, it still took some time. I'm sure we have some people sitting in the audience today who were in schools that integrated, who were individuals that integrated these new schools in the first class. And so the concept was, it's not good to have, they gets ruled against Plessy versus Ferguson that said separate but equal. And they're saying there's no such thing as separate but equal. You must have a level of integration. So that's 54 says. In 64, President Lyndon B. Johnson introduced the Great Society, which was a concept about how they should rebuild and put social protections in place for people who are disadvantaged. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Elementary and Secondary School Act, ESSA. as they refer to going forward. And that's when they first started getting these designations, Title I school. Title I school means that 50% or more of the students in the building qualify for free and reduced lunch. So it takes into consideration that these individuals are economically disadvantaged. Okay. Now, you know Charlotte plays a critical role in school integration. Anyone knew that? Anyone ever heard of Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education? So in 1971, Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education, Swan was a minister in the Charlotte area. He actually passed within the last 2 or 3 years. Swan, he didn't like that his child had to go past a school right in his neighborhood and go all the way over here for them to go to school. So he put pressure on the school board and he took it to legal counsel and and they ruled in his favor. So the reason why I have such a big school district, Charlotte and Mecklenburg schools, the way they approach addressing this inequality was busing. Busing. So the concept was, you ever wonder why so many people went to West Charlotte? Like so many diverse people went to West Charlotte? Because busing took them from where they were to West Charlotte to make sure that it was a more integrated, racially integrated school. And as was said in the panel, being racially integrated also demonstrated that it would be economically integrated, which meant that the dollars would follow some of these white and wealthy families with them into West Charlotte, into the school district. And so it tried to produce a greater equity. Now, some of us have been a byproduct of neighborhood schools. Some of us have attended integrated schools. But in 1999, after the 71 decision, race was no longer allowed to be considered in school assignments. Now, that was done by an individual who was protesting. They felt as if their daughter was being sent to the wrong kind of school because she was white and not black. And so they protested it, and the court ruled that no longer should race be considered in school assignments. And so in 2001, school mandatory busing was ruled unconstitutional. Also in 2001, President George W. Bush signed the No Child Left Behind Act. Many of us remember that. I was in school during that time frame. But it placed harder focus on testing, put more pressures on teachers, and in essence, they blamed teachers for children not passing. And so they said, well, we need to increase competition. So we need Karen and we need Sandra to be more competitive. We need them to have a greater desire to educate these kids. And so we will incentivize their ability to educate. So that's why you have principals and teachers who get more benefits based upon what metrics they're able to meet. You ever have a situation that's just not fair? Because this concept of all that matters is competition, meritocracy, starts off with the supposition that everyone starts at the same level. And that's not true. It assumes that everyone has the same opportunity. And that's not true. It assumes that when a child enters the classroom that they are well prepared. So, for instance, my son John, his first year of kindergarten was in the middle of COVID-19. So he started kindergarten, he's doing well, then COVID hit, and he had some losses in his ability to read. And there was work we had to put in to get him to where he needed to be. My mom's been working with him. He's doing a great job, right, John? Doing a great job of reading. He hates reading, but he's a great reader because of extra work. But not everyone has a mother who's an educator. Not every parent had the ability to stay home with their kids. And so we're looking at a reality in which no one, even when we're living in a, watch my quotations now, a post-racial society, starts off on the same playing field. Not everyone gets the same quality of teacher. Not everyone has the same parents who have the availability to stay home and work with them with their homework and do all these other things. And so schools are being evaluated based upon a test and what an algorithm that no one understands says they should be at. 2015, President Barack Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act. which unfortunately was not too far of a departure from No Child Left Behind. Still placing a prioritization on the quality of teachers, still blaming teachers for when kids fall behind, and not taking consideration that maybe a test isn't really a fair metric of evaluation. Maybe there should be more things to consider. And so in 2015, North Carolina begins to administer state distributed report cards to evaluate the schools. So now we have an F-rated school. Now we have a D-rated school. Now, oh, I'm moving, and y'all aren't moving with me. My bad. Now we have all these things going on. Now, 2017, Betsy DeVos was President Trump's educational secretary, right? And she developed focus grants. So under the Trump administration, his budget actually took money from education, put more towards military. But what it did is incentivize giving to these schools based upon grants, okay? So in essence, people could apply for grants for money when it was money they desperately needed. And then they could be penalized for not meeting these standards. So Trump developed the Focus Grant that was designed to send money to schools that participate in their school choice privatization of education initiative. 2018, how many remembers the HB 514 bill was passed? Anyone remember that bill? Yeah. So HB 514 allowed towns like Matthews, Mint Hill, Huntersville, and Cornelius to pull out, if they so choose, to pull out of CMS and to create town-run charter schools. Now, I'm going to show you a map real fast. So this is Charlotte, 1990, 2000, and 2010, okay? So the red area is where the white community lives. So in 1990, majority of the white community lived on this side of Charlotte, okay? Now, look at 2000. 2000, they're still here, but there's more spreading coming to Huntersville area, coming over this area, coming over this area. And then 2010, there is an increased amount of white flight from the certain areas of Charlotte. So it's pushing further south, pushing further towards Mint Hill. Now, question, can anyone look at this map and kind of see where Mint Hill is and Matthews is? I feel like I should get up and point at it directly. But I feel like we can see, we know Matthews, so this is Charlotte. Matthews is about right here. Mint Hill, Matthews about right here. And then you have Huntersville and Cornelius up at the north. So what you're saying, what's really happening is people are now having the freedom to potentially create town-run charters in areas that are now majority white, or the white community is spreading. So if you also look at some of the schools in these areas, these schools are given certain letter grades, and they're trying to reduce the amount of money that they're sending to CMS so that they can kind of have the money to themselves so they can run their town-run charter schools. So just a brief literature review of standardized tests. So standardized tests, many of us probably don't know this, is rooted in the eugenics movement. Anyone know what the eugenics movement is? No. So, thank you, son. The eugenics movement, in essence, was a movement that sought to prove and test the intelligence of black people, with a bias to prove the inferiority of the mental capacity of black people. So when you talk about standardized tests, these are not neutral tests. They came out of a movement that was designed to do what? Prove the mental inferiority of black people. You'll find this in Education Intelligence Assessment for African Americans. But studies have demonstrated that standardized tests are not equitably designed. And I even found that they damaged test taker self-esteem. So in 2003, Joan Boulder did a evaluation of an urban school district and a majority white school district. And the two schools within the district came together and they co-taught the courses. Now, they also gave an assessment. And the kids in the urban school outperformed the kids in the suburban school. Okay? I'm going to say it again. The kids in the urban school outperformed the kids, it was a math exam, in the suburban school. But then these same kids were then given a state standardized test. And the state standardized test, the white kids in the suburban school outperformed the black kids in the suburban school. And it wasn't close. I mean, they destroyed them. And so it says to us that the standardized tests do not measure intelligence. They ask more of a question, what do you know? More so ask a question, do you know what I know? They don't ask, what is it that you do know? You know the thing about a standardized test is, right? A standardized test that is given asks you questions, and it's normed for middle class white kids. So it asks you questions assuming that you know exactly what this is. So, you know, I spent the lion's share of COVID-19 at home with my kids where they're doing school. And there's some concepts I went over with them, and I knew that they knew the concept. But then, if they were struggling with reading, when they went to take the test and it was a word question, they may struggle because they didn't understand the word, they didn't understand what the word meant, and so they made mistakes. So it didn't look at 3 plus 3, but there's other things added to the test that made it hard for them to evaluate because they weren't familiar with these things based upon their environment and their neighborhoods. Standardized testing is disproportionately disadvantages black and brown and low ACS students. That's just facts. If you look at it, historically, black, brown, and low socioeconomic status students underperform on these exams. Now I'm going to move just to kind of get out of your way and then clear the room for our brother Emery, Mr. Emery, to come. So, if you look in CMS, okay, Title I schools that have a D and F grade. So if you look at the pie chart, 90% of Title I schools have a D and an F letter grade. Only 10% do better than that. Now, some would have you believe that these Title I schools have kids that aren't capable of learning or they're not doing well. And so it's because this and the third, they're not performing. But the reality is, who is the test designed for? So we look from 2014 to 2017, and it looks at those who gained a letter grade score. 91% of the schools remained exactly the same that were Title I. They didn't move up, they didn't move down, they stayed the same. And understand, to gain a letter grade, it doesn't matter if you move up. Oh, sorry. Keep doing this. It doesn't matter if you moved up on the test. What really matters is, did you reach this level? So it doesn't measure, so put it like this. If I was a C student before, and I moved from a C to a C plus student, it doesn't measure, am I growing? And my growth isn't really evaluated. All that matters is, am I still a C plus student? And if I have a student that is a student that's low performing, like one of my children is low performing, I'm more concerned that they're growing than you telling me, hey, they are just slightly better than they were before. And so the test doesn't take consideration, doesn't evaluate, doesn't consider growth as much as it considers whether you're still where you are. In terms of middle schools, 87% remain the same. and only 13% actually moved to letter grade. So what I hope that the data has kind of showed you is that these tests, these evaluations, these metrics are not really evaluating intelligence, not really evaluating growth. They're only looking at the test score. And while 80% now is geared towards the test score and 20% is geared towards EVOS, which measures your growth, it tells you that EVOS really doesn't matter. And so what happens is schools are still penalized for not reaching a certain standard. And so when we're evaluating, oh, is this a good school, is this a bad school, is this a A-rated school, or a B-rated school, really ask the question and really take time. I think as parents, if you're going to send your kid to a public school, take time to go and see the school for yourself before you determine, well, it's an F-rated school, so I need to put them in charter, I need to put them in private, I need to do this and the third. It's best to understand the school, because in these spaces, there's still a lot of urban brilliance and genius that the test scores aren't telling. There's still a lot of individuals who are going to go out and thrive, go to college and perform. So don't condemn a school or a teacher because that kid isn't growing based upon the letter grade. Look deeper, take it more seriously. Any questions before I have my say? Anyone have any questions they'd like to ask that I can answer? Okay. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. So that's a good question. So we have Title I supports that send extra money, right? But typically what's going to happen is schools are funded based upon the tax base, right? So typically a school that has a higher socioeconomic status clientele is going to have more money that's already going to their school. So what happens is teachers who are labeled high performers, teachers that are labeled to be able to turn kids around, are going to be more highly recruited into these higher rated schools, because urban schools, Title I schools, are more likely to have less experienced and less qualified teachers and educators. And so what's happening is it sucks good teachers out of the schools that need them the most and puts them into school environments because they can pay more, they have more benefits, they have more little things they can do, more resources, yeah. Anyone else have a question? So what I would suggest, just from the faith community perspective, is one, churches can partner with local community agencies. Sometimes churches, we don't put it all on our shoulders. And one thing I've learned as I've gone through pastoring and working on a PhD simultaneously is it's possible to stretch yourself too thin, right? And when you stretch yourself too thin, you're trying to do a lot of things, you're not able to do anything great. It would be far better if you partner with people who have the time, the capacity to provide services, and you network with them to help them utilize your facilities and partner and volunteer as you can, as opposed to placing it all on your shoulders. That's one way to address the issues we're seeing. Secondly, I think churches should do more around increasing literacy. I hope you know that literacy is kind of what these tests measure. The more literate you are, the more likely you'll be able to perform higher. So churches should provide libraries, tutoring, and all these things, books and all these programs that help individuals become better readers. Because as they become better readers, they're going to become better test performers. And it's going to open doors for scholarships, for opportunities. So that's one thing the church can do. But I think also we should also put pressure upon our state boards, not the local school boards, our state boards as to how we measure and evaluate schools. Because, unfortunately, the schools where a lot of the kids in the Black community or the Latinx community go to are more likely to be labeled D and F. And we are indicting them before they have the opportunity to do better. So that's my challenge for us today. If anyone else has any questions, you can ask, but if not, hand over to a good man, Tim Emery.
Time-wise, how are we? I would want to make sure we have enough time for questions. Is that right? It's 5:50? Yeah, that's right. What time are we trying to wrap? Okay, good. Thank you. And how does this clicker work? Just that way, right? That way? Oh, there we go. Look at that. Is it going to be easier for you if I stay in one place? Thank you for your honesty. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me again. I think I was here at the first annual, or was it the second annual? I think I was at the first. I must have been sleeping the second one. My apologies for missing that. But I'm honored to be back and to talk to you a little bit today. I'm mindful of the fact that I am the last thing separating you from fellowship time, so I'm going to try and be engaging and vital with my comments. My name is Tim Emery. I am running for district attorney, but I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I am a native of Nebraska. That's where I grew up. I came out east to come to college, went to college in the state of Virginia and went to law school in the state of Virginia as well. For about the past 20 years, I have been a criminal defense attorney. I started in the public defender office, representing exclusively indigent, poor people accused of crimes. I joined a small criminal defense firm after that for a number of years, and for about the last 10 years, I've had my own law firm, again, doing criminal defense work. Some of my clients hire me, but many are still court-appointed. There is such an overwhelming prevalence and disparity of poor people that are accused of crimes that the overwhelming majority of people accused of crimes are deemed indigent. So the public defender office can't handle all those cases, so private attorneys often step up and handle those cases as well. The only real exception, aside from criminal defense work at the state level that I do, is right now I am part of a team of attorneys. There's about 10 of us that are in the second phase of a lawsuit against Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department for their treatment, for their assaults on peaceful protesters June 2nd of 2020 in Uptown Charlotte, when approximately 300 peaceful protesters were still marching that evening in the immediate aftermath of the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and police intentionally sent them up one street so that they could trap them at the top of the street and then close the back end of the street and then close the alleyways and then shoot them with various gas and pepper balls and things of the like. So we are actively in a class action lawsuit representing many people who were injured that night against the police department. Being a criminal defense attorney for 20 years has allowed me to see up close and personal something that me as a white person would probably not have the opportunity to see otherwise, and that is the inherent racism and white supremacy that is rooted in the criminal punishment system. I have a few key sort of fundamental principles that I have come to believe and I have come to learn as a result of what I do every day in the courthouse. The first is the criminal justice system is not broken. It is working exactly as it was intended to, and that's the darn problem. The criminal justice system is deeply rooted in white supremacy and is systemically racist. In fact, I call it the criminal punishment system because it doesn't provide much justice. What it does a good job at is punishing. And that's about the only thing it currently does a good job at. The effect of this system is not contingent upon individual actors. It's not contingent upon individual police officers who are explicitly racist. It's not contingent upon individual judges who are acting with racial malice. It's not contingent upon individual defense attorneys who are racist against their black clients. It's not contingent upon prosecutors who have malicious racial intent. But these systems were built rooted in white supremacy. These are white supremacist systems. So they are producing the outcomes they are intended to without needing, individual racists acting in those roles. I believe systemic reform is necessary to produce a system with equitable outcomes across race. In short, and in plain language, these systems are so diseased that nibbling around the edges will never get us to where we need to be. There has to be a comprehensive dismantling and changing of these systems. And it's that is what's motivated me to run for district attorney. I love representing individual people. I love helping people. A person should not be defined by the worst thing that they've ever done or the worst thing that they've ever allegedly done. But I see every day the problems in the system, and it often leads me to help my client decide between two terrible options. And I want better options for them. And as a defense attorney, I can't create better options. The most powerful lever of power in the criminal punishment system is the elected district attorney through the use of prosecutorial discretion. It's the reason I'm seeking that position. I want to transform from a criminal punishment system to something actually resembling a justice system. That's my goal. I want to talk a little bit about racial disparities, and we're going to look at some charts here. This first pie chart is census demographics for the city of Charlotte. Now, all this data came from a wonderful website called nccopwatch.org, where you can get traffic data, stop data from every police jurisdiction in the state of North Carolina. The blue portion is white people in the city of Charlotte, 42%. The orange portion is black people, 34%. Gray is, I broke it down. I don't mean to otherize non-white, non-black people, but for the purposes of this illustration, I want you to focus on the blue and the orange. Now the next, so if 34% of the city of Charlotte are black people, the next slide is going to be what percentage of people are pulled over by CMPD in traffic stops. What do you expect to happen to that orange chunk? That piece of the pie? Bigger? All right. 57% of the people that CMP, this is 2019 data. I used the last non-COVID year so no one could accuse, well, COVID changed things and it's an outlier. I used the last non-COVID year, 2019. 57% of the people CMPD pulled over were black people. Now the next slide is going to be, of those people that were pulled over, how many of them had their car searched, their vehicle searched, or the person searched? What do you think is going to happen to the orange? 81% of the people who had their vehicles searched after car stops by CMPD in 2019 were black people. The final slide is going to be use of force. Now, that's not use of force across the board. That's use of force incidents where police use force after initiating a traffic vehicle stop. 88%. So when you start here and you end up here, this is the diseased system right here. And when we have diseased inputs, see what the prosecutor does is the prosecutor doesn't arrest people. The prosecutor doesn't charge people with crimes, right? The police do that. But when the input that's coming in is so flawed and so diseased, the prosecutor needs to have a high level of discernment and a high level of critical analysis. Otherwise, they're going to reproduce those numbers. And unfortunately, that's what's happening right now. The 4 things that are priorities to me in this campaign: number 1, police accountability. I want to hold police accountable when they break the law. Police are no better or worse than anyone else. They ought to be held responsible to the same laws that they enforce every day. Now we can look at the cases of Danquarius Franklin, of Ruben Galindo, of Harold Easter. That's just a few. It's over a dozen people that CMPD has killed since Keith Scott. Now, I know some of you were out on the streets in September 2016. I was too after Keith Scott was killed. I've lost count. I tallied it up when I started this campaign, but police have killed 2 more people since then. I think we're at 16 people that have died since Keith Scott. Now, I'm not saying all of those are murders. I'm not saying all of those weren't justified. But I've talked to some attorneys who've been attorneys for a long time in Mecklenburg County, and no one seems to know the last time a district attorney charged a police officer with killing someone. Some of you who have good memories may say Jonathan Farrell, right? There was an officer, Carrick, who was accused of killing Jonathan Farrell, who was an unarmed black man. But it was not the district attorney that made the decision to charge Officer Carrick, Randall Carrick. It was former Chief Rodney Monroe that made the decision that evening. And the DA at the time didn't even want the case, and so said, well, we have a conflict, and then some attorneys from the Attorney General's office came down. But we can, of course, the shootings capture our attention the most, and they're the most tragic. But there's everyday police misconduct that happens that is not held accountable. There is a police officer right now who is part of the DWI task force. That means he was specifically trained how to investigate, make DWI arrests. DWI is a danger to public safety, right? When you have people who are so impaired that they could drive around and hit and kill an innocent person, that's a serious threat to public safety. So he was arresting people and taking them down to the station to blow on the machine. So you want to know what the legal limit is in North Carolina for alcohol? 0.08, yeah. And if they were blowing under 0.08, 0.07, he was tearing the test ticket up and throwing it in the garbage. And then sometimes would retest the person because there's some variance in the machine. And depending on where someone is in their alcohol absorption rate, if you wait 15 minutes, they might turn a 0.07 into a 0.08. And he was doing that on multiple cases. And attorneys found out. Thankfully, Judge Curitin dismissed some of those charges. But the district attorney's office defended that officer, and they said, oh, he just made an honest mistake. That's evidence destruction. That's obstruction of justice. That's not an honest mistake. That ought to be disqualifying to be a police officer. There was a reporting of this incident happened a couple of years ago, but a black police officer from Gaston County, have you seen about this, the lawsuit? A Gastonia police officer was part of a joint operation. Now, we can talk about early morning raids of houses and the legitimacy of doing that, but that's what they were doing. They were investigating somebody who was alleged to be a drug trafficker, and it was a multi-police jurisdiction raid of this house early one morning, and it was a black Gastonia Police Department officer who went in the house, and then somebody shot, so he got down on the ground, and he was crawling, and he was shot at 14 times by a white female CMPD officer. Now, thankfully, he was only hit 5 times, and he survived. He is suing that police officer. He was in full uniform. He didn't fit the description of the suspect aside from the fact they were both black. He was about 100 pounds and about 6 inches shorter than the suspect description. Now, the SBI investigated and determined that the white female officer violated policy in doing that. Duh. CMPD has flagged that officer for termination, is going through the process of terminating the officer. The district attorney's office took those same reports and those same investigations and determined no charges would be filed against the white female officer for shooting at the black male officer 14 times. I want to create a specialized unit within the district attorney's office that is charged with investigating and prosecuting police officers who break the law. Now, in North Carolina, there is no statute of limitation for felonies. So the first order of business after I take office for that unit is to go back and look at all past suspicious police killings, looking for viable prosecutions. Just because somebody has previously made a determination of we aren't going to charge this officer doesn't mean someone new couldn't come in and bring a case. The second pillar of my campaign is ending the mass incarceration policies of the district attorney's office. There are a lot of them, and I could spend 3 hours running them down. I won't, don't worry. A couple of big ones. The habitual felon law. Habitual felon law is North Carolina's version of a 3 strikes law. 3 strikes laws have been proven to not improve public safety. In fact, in some states, there's a suggestion they have a negative correlation to public safety. They don't keep us safe, they're very costly, and they're horribly racist in their application. So much so that this district attorney's office has a habitual felon unit that specifically prosecutes people who are habitual felon eligible. Nearly 90% of the people being prosecuted by the habitual felon unit are black people. That sort of disparity is totally unacceptable. Anecdotally, I'll tell you a client that I had one time. He was a drug addicted person, so of course he had a bad record, right? And he was accused of stealing a television from his brother. Now that's not good. We shouldn't steal. We certainly shouldn't steal from our family. But only because of his prior record level, he is currently serving a 10.5-year minimum prison sentence right now. Now, I don't care who you are or what your prior record level is. No one should go to prison for 10.5 years for stealing a television or how good the TV is. So the policy position is I would abolish the habitual felon unit, and I would use prosecutorial discretion to never charge anyone with habitual felon. We see overcharging with mass incarceration policies. I have right now a case that I got court appointed where someone has enough misdemeanor larceny convictions, shoplifting convictions, eventually it can be a felony. So right now I'm representing a man who is being charged with a felony for stealing in the wintertime, allegedly stealing 3 pairs of socks from Dick's Sporting Goods. 3 pairs of socks from Dick's Sporting Goods. That's overcharging. A felony? I have people who steal cases of beer from Quick Trip, and because they've been previously banned from Quick Trip, there's this legal theory that says that's felony breaking or entering. Even though the store's open for business, you know you're not allowed to be there, so you're breaking or entering, and then when you steal a case of beer for $25, that's a second felony of larceny after breaking or entering. So I have a crack-addicted man who takes beer from Quick Trip to support his drug habit, and every time he does, he gets charged with 2 counts of 2 felonies. Over sentencing. We sentence people to too long of sentences. And at what point is enough enough? My goal is, in my policy position, is to reduce the amount of people we send to prison out of Mecklenburg County by 50%. Now, sometimes people say, what are we going to do about the murderers and the rapists, right? That's something that's often said to people who express some of my ideas. Well, did you know that in Mecklenburg County, the people we send to prison for homicide and violent sexual assaults, that they represent less than 12% of the people we send to prison overall. I'm not talking about the 10, 12%. No one's saying, give murderers or rapists a free pass. I'm saying let's look at those 88% and say, do all of these people really need prison? Because we know prison doesn't work. It doesn't rehabilitate. It doesn't keep us safe. In fact, we send nearly twice as many people to prison for property crimes out of Mecklenburg County than we do for murder and rape combined. So there's plenty of things that could be cut. The third pillar of the campaign is really cheating. It's a two-parter. Promote racial justice and promote restorative justice policies. Racial justice, that pie chart that we looked at where the orange just kept growing and growing and growing like an infection, those are called pretextual stops, right? It's not that black people drive that much worse than white people. Trust me, I live in an area where a lot of white people live, and there's a whole lot of white people that are really bad drivers and break a lot of traffic laws. But it's that we have a city that is policed in two different ways, depending on if you're in the crescent or the wedge. And I would refuse to accept for prosecution cases based on pretextual stops. I want to address excessive sentences. There are some existing community groups. Redress North Carolina does phenomenal work. And I want to identify people who have served an excessive amount of time and figure out how as district attorney, I can play a role in getting those people home and getting them reunited with their families and back in their communities. There's a person right now who was sentenced for a robbery and a kidnapping at 15 years old. He was 15 years old when this happened. He's now 43 years old. He has been in prison since he was 15 years old. He's 43 years old, and he's not eligible for parole until 2028. Now, if I were the DA today, I could join his counsel in a motion for appropriate relief, and we could get him home within a week. And that's what I want to do. In terms of I want to work with outside agencies. There's plenty of organizations nationwide that are looking at disparities. There's one just up the road in Durham, the Wilson Center. It's connected to Duke University. They're partnering with the Durham DA's office to study plea bargaining. That's the real black box. No one knows what happens there. The district attorney's office of Durham County has agreed to participate and open up the door and let them see that process. I would do the same. Currently, the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office has not extended that offer to the Wilson Center. Restorative justice. Restorative justice holds a lot of promise because it's a real path in which we can improve public safety and reduce crime. Okay? We can get the Charlotte we all want. Restorative justice is a victim-centered process where a person who does harm is made to come into community with the person they've harmed and see the dimensions of how their harm has affected that person and that person's lives. Then everyone creates some steps, some specific steps that person can do to be held accountable to the community and to serve as restitution for the harm that they've done, and then they can ultimately be brought back into the community. We don't do anything remotely like that now. What we do now is punish, or we'll send you to probation, and probation is just like a real sadistic game of Simon Says. I call probation the slow train to prison because it's setting people up to fail. It isn't therapeutic. It could be made to do that, but it's not right now. I think restorative justice has a lot of, and it's demonstrated empirically that it's got a lot of success, particularly with young people. And I would really embrace some comprehensive restorative justice processes to really, as a sincere way to reduce crime and improve public safety. There we go. The third one is a commitment to never seeking the death penalty. I'm pretty sure it's etched up here. Thou shalt not kill. I believe that. To me, there's a whole lot of reasons to oppose the death penalty, but for me it comes down to a moral issue. I don't think that the government should be in the business of saying, we're going to try and kill this citizen. The death penalty is one of the most visible symbols of white supremacy in North Carolina. If you look at the history of it within North Carolina, it doesn't deter crime. It doesn't keep us safe. We have wrongful convictions. We've had people that we've sent to death row in North Carolina that have been proven innocent, and that's happened nationwide. In fact, nearly 10% of people who have been sent to death row have been later exonerated as being actually innocent. That level of error rate is totally unacceptable. They currently are pursuing a capital case right now in Mecklenburg County. It doesn't happen a lot here, but it's happening right now. And I would commit to never seeking the death penalty. Our neighbors to the north in Virginia have recently banned the death penalty statewide, and Raleigh needs to do that. But until then, if you have a DA who has the will to do it, they can ban it within this community, within Mecklenburg County, and that's what I aim to do. I want to stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions, comments, anything.
You're going upriver. You know what I mean when I say that?
Yeah.
Do you think you can be at least 40% to 50% successful in anything that you're saying?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe that we can, the pledges that I make in my campaign, I've thought carefully about them. They're all things that the prosecutor can act unilaterally on. Now, I'm not saying I want to be a lone wolf. I want to work with city council. I want to work with police if possible. I want to work with the sheriff. I want to work with the judges. But all of the things that I pledge to do in my campaign, if I can't get them on board, I do have the ability to act unilaterally. That prosecutorial discretion is very powerful. It's just that for hundreds of years, it's been used to be punitive, and it's been used to harm people that don't look like me, to favor people that do look like me. Prosecutorial discretion can be just as easily used to say, what does justice look like? And how can we achieve it? So I know and if you go to my website, it's even more ambitious. I have a lot, I do a video every Wednesday, it's called Policy Wednesdays, and I lay out a policy position that's somewhere rooted in the pillars of the campaign. And there's a lot of things on there, and I'm gonna do one every Wednesday until May 17th. But I firmly believe that they all can be done, and they all will be done. And if they aren't, I'll be the first to come back in 4 years and say, if I failed at these things and don't have darn good explanations of the ones I failed on, I say you need to make me a one-term district attorney. I let you down. I don't have any interest in being a politician. I don't have any interest in aspiring to higher political office. I'm running for district attorney because I want Charlotte to be the safest community in the United States. I just have a vastly fundamental difference of opinion in terms of how to get there as the traditional thought. The old school thinking, tough on crime, law and order policies have gotten us exactly where we are right now. If any of this stuff worked, we'd have the safest communities that the world has ever seen because we spend more on police and we spend more on prison and we send more people to prison than any other place in the history of the world. Yet we still have crime rates that far exceed other so-called industrialized nations. So we know what doesn't work. Do we have the courage to try something that will work? Now, I have the will to try that. If people want to get on board with that, that's great, and we will go on that experiment, and we will really create a Charlotte that can say, I want to go in and give a talk and say the criminal justice system and mean it. I want that word justice to mean something. I want to put a sign in every assistant district attorney's office or cubicle that says, what does justice look like in this case? They don't do that enough. There's a lot of box putting and there's a lot of number crunching, and they don't see the basic humanity in everyone. I think that everyone has basic humanity. No one's as good as their best moments. Lord knows I'm not as good as I am in my best moments. And no one's as bad as their worst moments. But what we have right now is a system that disproportionately brings in black and brown people and then judges them only based on what we believe to be their worst moments, and doesn't look at the totality of the person, and also doesn't ask critical questions of, is any of this stuff working? Is sending a man to prison for 10 years for stealing a television going to accomplish anything? Or is it going to take an already vulnerable community and make them even more vulnerable? You know, I am blessed in that I live in a community that, you know, doesn't suffer with some of the constant background noises that Hidden Valley suffers from, right? And there's a lot of good people that live in this community. I've met them. But the answer is not over-policing of those same communities that are suffering. And that's what we get far too often. That the answer is, well, we got to focus on hotspots. We've got to no tolerance policy. That's just all code for, the belief in the inherent criminality of blackness. And I refuse to accept that. And I refuse to be part of a system that pushes black people off to prison at rates far in excess of what we do anyone else. And that's what we have right now, to be quite honest. 82% of the people we sent to prison in Mecklenburg County in 2019 were black people. 82%. In a county, the city is 35% black. The county is 33% black. So in a county that's 33% black, 82% of the people we sent to prison in our last non-COVID year were black people. That should send off big red alarms. And unfortunately it doesn't, because this system doesn't study itself. It doesn't provide data. Pastor Wills presented on the education system, and there's plenty of problems there, and there's plenty of bias in it, but at least it captures a little bit more data than the criminal punishment system does. The criminal punishment system doesn't want to capture data because they know if people see the raw numbers and they see what's really happening, we will all move to immediately dismantle these systems. That was, I took your question and went all the way. I promise I will try to be more succinct if there's another question. Yeah, sir. I tell you what, I'm not a braggadocious person, but we're doing really well. I wish we ought to have publicly financed campaigns, because I think it would allow a wider variety of people from backgrounds and ideas to run for office. But until then, money is a big part of politics, and raising money, pretty unprecedented. But I outraised my opponent, the incumbent, at the end of last year. There's a lot of people that support me. There's a lot of people. I may be a new face to some of you, but I think that I have a history of activism and talking about these things that go back a long time. And I think that I love that we're getting out of Omicron, because more I can talk to people, I think people see that I'm sincere. I hope you see that I'm sincere in what I'm talking about and that I'm earnest in it. And we really can win this thing. I can break down for you one-on-one the different mechanics of a Democratic electoral primary and an off-year presidential election, how it's low turnout, and if we have more folks who are motivated, we can get there. But I've got a staff of 4, and we've got a motivated team, and it's growing each day. And I see I'm grinding away every day. I still have my practice. I'm still trying to represent people as best I can, but I see that growth happening each day. I see us getting there, you know. And if I don't get there for some reason, I'll still be here. And as long as Pastor Willis allows me to come, I'll come and continue to talk about the problems and ills of this system. I'm not going anywhere. Yeah. That's right. I saw a hand over here. Yeah, ma'am. Yeah.
That would be limited to a specific jurisdiction.
Correct.
And so when I think about how many other people would be of the same mindset in multiple jurisdictions, and then I think about the privatization of prisons and the impact that such a strong machine could have.
That's right.
Opposing some of the goals that you have. How do you overcome that machine, the privatization?
Yeah. We're thankful. There's a whole lot of problems nationwide, and a lot of them overlap across jurisdictions. I will say North Carolina doesn't use, quote, private prisons in state court. But what we do have is this thing, and I forget the acronym, Cass, you might remember it, but there's some statute that's created this like pseudo corporation that profits off the labor of people that are in North Carolina prisons. But it's like a state-run corporation. So I would argue that's part of the private prison industry. I mean, that ultimately should be gone. But I guess at the root of your question is, and it's something that I struggle with, but we've got to start somewhere. And this is my community. I live in Charlotte, and I've lived here for the last 20 years. And I really think that if we get in, and I work with existing community organizations, that's the thing I didn't get a chance to talk about. I trust community and community leaders far more than I do guys in suits sitting in an office uptown. You know what I mean? And I want to work with community organizations on the ground to address these issues. And I really think that it's going to work. I know that these ideas will, it's not a panacea and it won't be a magical fix, but we'll start to see some real improvements to the way justice is delivered. And then other communities will look at what we're doing. And I believe that you lead by example, right? And if other communities see what we're doing and it's working, they'll come in and they'll want to study. Cities love to steal good ideas. And if they see it working, then maybe that's the way we spread it to other communities, and sort of, you know, keep that fire burning. But it's a good question, and it's something that I really struggle with, because I know people who live just over the border in Union County, or just over the border, we're not far from Cabarrus County, right? That place is nuts as it relates to the criminal punishment system there. I can't, we can only do so much, right? Sometimes I have to say no to things in my personal life. I'm sure you do too. You get asked to do things. And so what I'm trying to focus on is Charlotte right now. Yeah. Okay. We have the best stories. Yeah. If you meet a criminal defense attorney in a party, just hang close to them.
And so, in most DA's offices, prosecutors, you know, it's kind of from the top down.
Yes.
And so, I just wonder how you would change that mindset and culture throughout the office, because it's kind of ingrained in, I would say, pretty much all of the
Correct.
offices. So, how do you foresee doing that?
We have to do culture change, right? And you're exactly right. I've already talked to a few defense attorneys that I highly respect and are smarter than me, to be quite frank. They have some willingness to come over and join. So I'm going to actively recruit from other places. If I know people who are really sharp, and I'll say, here's a problem and I want you to figure out an equitable way to solve this. And two is, and I don't mean to be flip with this, and my girlfriend hates it when I talk about this, but you know, there's something called at-will employment, right? And it's not that I take delight in firing anyone, but what this lift is too heavy and too important to allow people within an office to undermine what we're trying to do. So I want to give everyone an opportunity to get on board with what we're doing, but ultimately, if they can't get on board, my attitude is, I haven't fired them, they've fired themselves. I'm not afraid to do that. And it's not, you know, I know that can be taken so out of context, but like, I'm sincere in that. It's not something I would take delight in, but at the same point in time, we've got a job to do, and we've got real justice to deliver, and we've got systems to revamp. And if you're still stuck in your old ways, there's a lot of other places you can go. But not here. Cass? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and that's a good question. And if you watch the world of so-called progressive prosecutor politics, you'll see that there's some real smear campaigns going on against other people who are doing these things. I think I can handle it. I don't want to tell you 100% definitively yes, Cass, because I've never been in that exact situation. I've been in plenty of situations where I've been criticized. I was a student leader in college, and I was heartily criticized on some things. But I have one of my personal principles, and one thing that I pray about sometimes and try and embed in my thick skull is that other people's opinion of me is none of my business. Now, that's a lot easier when it's just a friend on friend versus all these systems and bad press. But I really want to try and hold on to that. Other people's opinion of me is none of my business. I want to try and work with them and let them see that this stuff can work and that I'm sincere in it. But I'm not afraid to be the cowboy with the black hat in the room. You know, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I have represented people who have been accused of doing terrible, awful, horrible things, sometimes to innocent people. And I'm standing right next to them. And I might have my hand on their shoulder because no one else has their back. No, everyone else looks at them as a monster. And by proxy, I'm a monster in that courtroom. Because I dare stand next to someone who allegedly did something to a child. So I'm experienced being the bad guy in the room, you know. Now, granted, what we're talking about is a scale much larger than that. But I think that I do have some past life experiences that I can lean on, and I have a faith that I can lean on, and I have a belief that what we're doing is right and just and ethical and proper, that hopefully it allows me to turn out that noise as much as possible and keep my head down on the work. The work is, I love data. I love numbers. I have relationships with some media members, and they always want these anecdotal stories about the criminal punishment system. And I always tell them, the data is the story. That 82%, that's the story, not individual cases, because anecdote makes terrible policy. It really does. I mean, I've told you some anecdotes today to illustrate my points. But it's a good question, Cass, and I don't want to minimize the challenges of trying to swim upstream. I think you said, sir, in a community I think that Charlotte really loves to fashion itself as very progressive, but when the rubber hits the road, sometimes, you know, we're stuck in park, right? And so there's going to be some of that. I'm going to try. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not perfect. Nobody is, right? And then, you know, if Jesus comes down and wants to run for district attorney, I'll withdraw from the race, right? And throw my support behind Jesus. But, you know, I'm going to make mistakes. My pledge is I'm going to try my hardest to get this right. And I always want to be accountable. That's my cell phone, you know? If you have a question and want to talk to me, I probably won't pick up because the phone does ring a lot nowadays, but I'll do my best to get back to you if you leave a message. If you don't leave a message, I'll assume you're wanting to sell me a car, an extended warranty policy, right? Any other questions? Thank you so much for your patience and your time. I know that we're right up against it, and I really appreciate y'all hanging in there on a Saturday early evening. I know there's a lot more exciting things that we could be talking about or you could be doing, but these are important things, and that's the reason I'm doing it. I have a good life. I'm not rich, but I'm able to pay my bills most months as a criminal defense attorney, and it'd be really easy to just continue doing what I'm doing, but I felt called for this, and I felt called that the time is right to raise these issues, and let's see if the rest of Charlotte can get on board with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Emery, for your presentation. We're going to wrap up and wind down. Thank for everyone who came and those who watched online. We had, I would say, sporadic up and down online presence, but I think at our peak we got about 20 people viewing online, and so on and so forth. And I know people are excited to be here. So thank you for all of our presenters. Our panelists have stepped away, but Tim, thank you. Thank you, me, for presenting. But just want to take this time now to close with a word of prayer. And then after we get out, sunsets at 6:16. What time did I say? 6:16. So people will be open for business. They will try to tempt you before 6:16. We'll wait till 6:16 before you go. We have Molly Q's truck. We have smoke. What's it? You have the card, babe. You have the card. Smoke barbecue. Yeah, and another gentleman who's coming as well. So we invite you to stay. We'd like you to spend some of your money. So the vendors, I'm sure they're wondering why they say it all this time if we didn't spend no money. So let's make sure to support their business at Sunset. Let's close with a word of prayer, and then we'll dismiss. And also in the Family Life Center, we have vendors and other organizations that can tell you a little bit about what they're doing. So please join us or at the Family Life Center. Yes, let's pray. Dear kind and most gracious Heavenly Father God, we thank you for life, health, and strength. We thank you for the ability to listen and reflect. God, we ask that we would have wisdom, that we would attempt to do justice and what is right, and that we would grow in our relationships on this evening. We thank you for just life, breath, air. This is something that we can't take for granted in the midst of a global pandemic. And we ask, oh God, that you would navigate us on out of this mess even now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.